Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Cyrus is plucked from the ocean by Myrnst aboard a waverider and carried off to parts unknown. What does this latest twist in the tale have in store for Cyrus's journeys in Edara? We're about to find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 11. On the Weathered Shore. Cyrus. The 6th day of winter. Midmorning. In time, I had warmed up from my plunge in the water, and as we cruised south on the stiff, sharp ocean breeze, the rising sun turned the dark, wintry sea a deep, vast blue, sending rainbow mists soaring into the air whenever we crashed through the waves. Wayla was just as skillful as Myrnst had made her out to be, and she was smiling as we zipped along the troughs and crests of the steady waves, heading southeast down the coast, where the open ocean waters gave way to sprawling archipelagos in shallow, calm seas. At that point, Wayla adjusted the shell of the vessel, removing 3 panels from the back of the waverider to leave the sun shining down on the back of the boat and the cool ocean breeze still filling the air. Onward we went, zipping through gaps and eddies in miniature islands topped with spiraling plants and multicolored mosses, all watched over by swirling flocks of seabirds drifting motionless on the breeze. Myrnst stopped to share more tea with me at the back of the vessel, and together we watched the ocean beneath us, whose clear, shallow waters teemed with countless species of sea creatures. There were reef fish in every size, shape, and shade that made the seafloor a psychedelic reflection of flickering color. We watched them as they wove among the corals and drifting kelp and anemones, occasionally chased and hunted by armored cephalopods that surged along the ocean floor propelled by jets of water and shimmering ink. Columns of volcanic rock were polka-dotted by speckles of bright red eels. They hunted schools of tiny flitting water dragons, and then they hid, receding into the rock when corkscrewing hunting pairs of underwater seabirds flickered through the water. Sometimes, even those columns of rock themselves moved and shifted, revealing that they had been on the backs of scuttling, many-legged arthropods that were either my size or much, much larger. Beside us, small, weaving sail serpents came to cruise at the top of the water, leaping and playing in the wake of the boat and examining us before wrenching off after schools of thick-bodied torpedo seals or tightly packed groups of flickering silver fish, which even Myrnst claimed could be hard to identify from a distance. Once, we even sailed through a school of hawk rays as they ran from the powerful, pulsing strokes of a massive green terra turtle. Despite the fact that the turtle was nearly the size of our waverider, Wayla was unperturbed as it swam up alongside us, pushing the red-backed hawk rays to the surface. The school fled in fear, and then all at once they leapt from the water in droves and began to glide through the air next to the top of the boat. They were wrapped in mottled white and blue and gold camouflage that was designed to look exactly like the rippling sky above. And, at least for that time, most of the rays got away. They rode the thin layer of air coming off of our prow and extended their journey far beyond where the terra turtle and its shell covered with earth and rock predicted that they would be landing. We watched it slow behind us, head above the water, searching, trying to figure out where the rays had been, but instead they simply glided along with us. Eventually the hawk rays turned off, and as we continued south, the oceanic edge faded further from view, and that strong breeze off the ocean began to die, but that didn't necessarily mean that we slowed down. Now it was Myrnst's time to put his gift to use, though his was a little bit different than I expected. With a call out to Wayla, he strode up to the front as we began to settle in the water. She rolled her eyes playfully, but took his hand nonetheless, and together they began to slow dance at the front of the vessel. Myrnst was humming something out and chatting into her ear, and then in 3 twirls she had a grudging smile on her face, and they kept swaying back and forth. She was glowing a little bit, but now the outline around her glistened with gold and white and silver, the same colors that came radiating out from him, and wrapped around her natural blue glow. His force came in slowly, so slowly that I barely noticed it, but eventually our winds began to pick up again, and in time we were cruising again, even faster than the natural wind had carried us. And watching them dance, I realized I'd actually started to get kind of used to the way that different colliding energies around me felt. I'll explain a little bit more. From out in the ocean, things were a deep blue. From the shore, which was still far away, but not so far that I couldn't sense it, there were earthy browns and greens. Above us were the silvers and golds and whites of the sky, and the wind and the clouds. And for a while it had just been those. But now, out in front of us, I could sense some place that breathed with new colors, enough to fill in the whole spectrum, covering everything that had been missing. There were muted pinks and deep purples, rich oranges and yellows and rusty reds, and blacks and silvers and whites, all mixing together at once in a kaleidoscopic surge for the senses. And we're getting closer. Wayla and Myrnst still danced, but Myrnst's hum had started to fade, and as we circled another set of islands, cut under an enormous cavern carved out by millennia of waves, and scooted out into a secluded bay, I saw our destination. It was a rugged volcanic rock, much like the islets that jutted out of the water. Only somewhere up on its top, there still smoldered a deep, glowing red, like the fire beneath the land here had not yet fallen asleep. And still, water ran down from a little spring at the top in streams, guiding streaks of miniature trees and shrubs along the mossy landscape, all dotted with shimmering veins of purple and orange and rust reds. As we looped around the ocean side of the island, the bold rock faces of the little islet fell steadily down into the sea, where sandy shores met at the center of the island, covered and revealed by the cool water of every third wave. Wayla and Myrnst stopped their dance as we glided into the bay, still being investigated by the creatures of the archipelago. As we settled into the water, otherworldly wind resting behind us, Wayla and Myrnst quickly made their way to the back, hurling anchor lines over the edge of the vessel. We drifted to a stop as the anchor caught on the shallow, sandy basin of the bay, and for a moment I just watched the line as frustrated, scuttling sandwalkers poked out of the ground to investigate the anchor, followed by strings of ovals and angels and silverfish that explored up the line and nearly up to the surface. The wind Myrnst had summoned for us was gone, and Myrnst was pulling in the sail, so as the anchor caught, we twisted and floated lazily in the waves, in a gentle rise and fall that only left the gentle lapping of sea on the shore and the occasional cry of a bird somewhere off in the distance. The island was directly ahead as I stared out the back of the waverider. Now, it was warmer here in the archipelago than it was on the continent's edge, but as I put a tentative finger in the water, I jolted back in shock. The water flowing past here was ice cold, far colder than it had been when I'd first jumped in. Well, maybe I'd just gotten comfortable with the warm tea and my cozy Sestrin clothes, which had dried off by now. There was a splash right next to me, and the wave cruiser gently rocked as Wayla dove into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. Myrnst came up next to me as I watched Wayla, who continued pulsing strokes underneath the water, nearly halfway to shore now with no sign of slowing.
"Oh, she's beautiful, isn't she?"
he said, in his heavily accented Uveran, but with an accent I couldn't quite place.
"I've met very few people like her,"
I said, in an airy, sing-songy language that made Myrnst quirk an eyebrow.
"Oh, you speak Gaelish?"
he asked. "I've got a thing with languages," I said, trying to normalize my accent, but realizing I had no idea how to do so.
"Don't try it. Is that your native language?"
He nodded, running a hand through his long white hair.
"Oh, yes, sir,"
he said, joining me back in that airy sing-songy language. This time, he felt far more comfortable with it.
"I was born far south, about as far west, in the mountains of Skye as you can still call it the Skylands." Always get the weird ones, the border parts, and I sure as heck was one of 'em. Natural-born wind waker, so my life might have been real easy if I kept to that path, but I was so in love with the sea that I left home to make a living on the water.
He whistled out, and a little eddy rippled along the waves. Was that where you met Wayla? I asked. She was nearly to the shore now and burst up through the surface, throwing her long ponytailed hair back and shaking it dry as she strode through the waist-deep water to the sand. Myrnst seemed like he hadn't heard me, instead humming happily as he watched her saunter through the water. Finally, he shook his head.
Ah, yes, young'un,
He said, looking off into the distance, collecting his thoughts.
She was one of the officers aboard one of the vessels I found work on. Very regimented in her life, that one. Brushed me off about 16 times before she'd given me the time of day, and another dozen before she told me I wasn't worth her time. Thought I was just another foreigner with fetish for Sestran girls. And it was only when I started to show some talent in waking the winds that she even paid attention to me. Sestrans have a pretty damn huge respect for windwakers, so that helped a lot, but even so, it was a few years before I could get her to even kiss me. Swear sometimes she still thinks I'm a flighty landlubber.
He smiled at me then, and clapped me on the back.
Well, over the side we go,
he said.
Time's about we start getting to know what gift fate has blessed you with.
I looked at him for a second before I realized and remembered. Oh yeah, we were here to test out my gift, whatever that meant. I'd forgotten all of that in the chaos of the morning, but suddenly I was excited, and suddenly I was nervous, and also excited and nervous, and did I mention that I was nervous and excited? Above all of it, though, I was not excited about getting back in the water. Still, Myrnst handed me my water glasses.
I'll see you ashore,
he said. And with a leap no less graceful than Wayla's, he sliced into the water, emerged across the surface, and began a steady stroke towards land. See, it's gonna be really cold, isn't it? I said. Yep. But hey, I've got an idea. How about you just think about all the creatures that are sitting there watching you swim? What? Why is that supposed to help? I asked. I don't know, might make you swim faster. Tying my water glasses against my head, I breathed deep a few times, gave myself a couple fake jumps, and then stopped again. Looking back across the water, Myrnst had almost reached the shore, and Wayla was looking back with her arms crossed. For some reason, that look from her was enough to get me to jump in the water, because I didn't know why, but I got the feeling that Wayla was way scarier than most of the fish that were around us at that point. And so, with a frantic rush to the shore through freezing cold water, I eventually made it onto the sand, where I raced up away from the gently lapping waves, jumping and shaking to try to return some feeling to my body. Myrnst had laughed, went over to Wayla to share a brief word, and then came over to find me, where I had found and laid on one of the smooth, warm rocks, basking in the sun. Quickly, the memory of the cold faded away. Everything here smelled so clean and so alive, and I honestly felt like I could have just sat back and relaxed there for hours. The cool, misty breeze coming off of the water was warmed by the sun by the time it hit the rocks, which practically seemed to hum with a warm, earthy steadiness. Scents swirled around me, the bright fragrance of little wildflowers and mosses, punctuated by different tinges of minerals and rock. Altogether, it was a sensual rainbow, and even though I could feel Myrnst stop, standing over me as he arrived, I was content to just let my eyes close and melt. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edara and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.